The morning light at Vega Prime Spaceport was golden and soft, casting a warm glow on the polished silver floor tiles. The terminal was alive with the sounds of travelers, rolling luggage, soft chatter, and the occasional hum of a hovering baggage drone. Screens above the gates showed destinations written in glowing blue text, names of distant worlds where twin suns rose and seas shimmered like crystal. Maris Helene walked slowly through the terminal, her leather travel bag held in one hand. The bag was old, the kind that carried memories of many journeys. Its brown surface was scuffed from years of use, yet it was sturdy, reliable, and hers. Maris herself was small in stature, her shoulders slightly bent with age, but her eyes were steady and bright. She moved with a quiet confidence, the kind that came from living a full life, not from wealth or display. Her ticket for the Aurora skies was carefully tucked inside the front pocket of her coat. She had checked it 3 times that morning, first when she woke up, then again before leaving her modest apartment, and once more while walking to the gate. It was an important trip, one she had been looking forward to for months, the boarding. Gate was ahead, glowing with a soft blue light. Beyond the transparent walls of the spaceport, the Aurora skies rested like a jewel among the stars. It was a magnificent vessel, sleek and bright, with silver hull plating that reflected the light of Vega Prime's twin moons. The ship was new, the pride of the Ellen interstellar fleet, and passengers spoke of its comfort and speed as if it were a floating palace. Maris joined the small line leading up to the gate. The attendant at the counter was a tall young man in a crisp uniform. His badge read Lauren, and his dark hair was combed neatly to the side. His voice was polite but clipped as he scanned each passenger's ticket. The line moved quickly until Maris stepped forward. She gave him a warm smile and offered her ticket. He scanned it with a flick of his wrist device, then frowned slightly. His eyes moved from the small glowing screen to Maris, then back to the screen. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Lauren said with a formal tone, "but this ticket does not allow boarding on this vessel." Maris blinked, surprised. "That can't be right," she said softly. "It's a first-class ticket for this very ship. I bought it months ago." Lauren glanced at her travel bag, then back at her face. His expression remained polite but firm. "The system is not showing your booking as valid. Perhaps there was a change in schedule. Do you have a confirmation code?" Maris reached into her coat and pulled out a printed receipt. The paper was slightly creased but clear. She handed it to him and he scanned the code. The device beeped once, then flashed red. He handed the paper back to her with a faint shrug. "I'm afraid you may have purchased a ticket for a different service," he said. "This section of the vessel is reserved for certain passengers. Perhaps you could speak to ticketing in the lower terminal to arrange a different seat." Maris kept her voice calm. "I'm certain this is my ship and my seat. If you could please check the passenger manifest, you'll find my name there." Lauren smiled faintly, though it did not reach his eyes. "Unfortunately, ma'am, the manifest is correct. There's nothing else I can do from here." Passengers behind Maris shifted impatiently. Some glanced at her with curiosity, others with mild irritation at the delay. A mother with 2 young children stepped forward to ask if the line could move. But Lauren raised his hand to stop her, keeping his attention on Maris. Maris studied the young man for a moment. She saw no unkindness in his face, only certainty. Certainty that she did not belong on this vessel. She gave a small nod and stepped aside, allowing the next passenger to move forward. Her heart beat a little faster, but her expression remained composed. From her new position near the side of the gate, she could see the Aurora skies through the tall glass windows. The ship's docking bridge extended like a silver arm, leading into the main passenger entrance. Crew members in white uniforms moved about, checking equipment and guiding travelers. The scene was beautiful, yet it felt distant to Maris now, as though a thin glass wall stood between her and the place she needed to be. She took a slow breath and reached for her travel bag's strap. The bag's weight was familiar, comforting. She had been in situations before where patience was the key to finding the path forward. This felt like one of those moments. The boarding announcements continued over the speakers, calling different passenger groups by number. The voice was calm and pleasant, yet every announcement that passed without her name felt like a door quietly closing. Maris kept her gaze on the ship. She could wait. She had waited for many things in her life, and waiting was not defeat. A young couple nearby whispered to each other, glancing at her with curious eyes. Maris met their gaze for a brief second and smiled politely. They smiled back, though their curiosity remained. Across the hall, a small cleaning robot rolled past, humming softly as it polished the floor. Minutes passed. Lauren, the attendant, continued scanning tickets, his voice brisk and efficient. He did not look toward Maris again. The Aurora skies remained still, her silver form gleaming under the station lights, ready to leap into the deep reaches of space. Maris stood quietly, her mind calm but alert. There was a reason for everything she believed, and sometimes the reason revealed itself when others least expected it. Maris remained near the side of the gate, her ticket still in her coat pocket. The air in the terminal felt cooler now, though the light from the massive glass windows was still warm. She stood with her travel bag close, watching the line move forward. Each passenger was scanned, greeted, and sent across the boarding bridge toward the Aurora skies. The hum of the terminal was steady, luggage drones gliding over the floor, passengers speaking in soft tones, and the occasional announcement from the overhead speakers. But among those sounds, Maris could sense something else. A murmur. A faint whisper that was not one voice, but many. It came from scattered corners of the waiting area. Small groups of travelers speaking quietly, their eyes flicking in her direction. Near the far side of the gate, two men in sharp business suits leaned close to each other, one gesturing toward Maris with his chin. They spoke in low voices, but the look in their eyes was not unkind, only curious. By the seating area, a mother who had been waiting with her children whispered something to another woman, both glancing quickly before looking away. Maris had lived long enough to understand the language of glances. People often looked without truly seeing. They saw clothing, posture, age, and made quiet guesses. It did not trouble her. If anything, it reminded her of times when she had traveled to far colonies where her presence was just as unexpected to the locals. Still, the attention around her was unusual. It was not only curiosity. She could sense a shift in the air, as if a question had been placed in the minds of several passengers at once. Lauren, the gate attendant, continued scanning tickets. His movements were practiced, efficient, and almost mechanical. He smiled at some passengers and spoke in a brisk tone to others. But whenever Maris was in his line of sight, his eyes seemed to avoid her entirely. A short distance away, a service attendant in a pale blue uniform was adjusting a display of travel brochures. She glanced toward Maris, then toward Lauren, then back to her brochures. Her hands moved slower now, her mind clearly elsewhere. Maris watched all of this without changing her calm expression. She stood tall despite her small frame, her fingers resting lightly on the strap of her bag. She was not a person who believed in forcing her way forward. She believed in timing, and timing often favored those who kept their eyes open. A boarding announcement played again, calling the next set of passengers. The sound of footsteps on the boarding bridge echoed faintly through the glass walls. Aurora skies gleamed in the sunlight, its silver hull bright and smooth. Behind Maris, a young man wearing a travel jacket and carrying a small backpack approached the line. He noticed the ticket in her coat pocket and spoke gently. "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you waiting to board? They just called your section a few minutes ago." Maris smiled at him. "I was called, yes, but there seems to be a question about my ticket." The young man's eyebrows lifted slightly. A question? That's unusual. Maybe they can sort it out quickly. They have checked, Maris said, her tone even. But for now, I wait. The young man hesitated, then nodded politely before stepping into the line. As he moved forward, Maris noticed him glance back once, as if still thinking about her words. At the far side of the terminal, a pair of security officers entered the area. They wore dark blue uniforms with gold trim, the crest of the Vega Prime, spaceport on their shoulders. Their steps were measured, their eyes scanning the passengers as they walked. Most travelers paid them little attention, but Maris saw them pause for a moment as they noticed her. They did not approach. Not yet. But they spoke briefly to each other before moving toward the gate counter. The whisper in the air seemed to grow. A few passengers near the windows turned their heads, trying to see what had caught the officer's attention. Lauren straightened his posture slightly when he noticed them, but his scanning motion did not slow. Maris shifted her weight gently, from one foot to the other. She was patient, but she was also aware. Something was moving beneath the surface of this ordinary boarding process. A man sitting on a bench nearby leaned toward another passenger and murmured, "She's been standing there since I arrived, ticket in hand, but they won't let her board." His companion replied quietly, "Strange. Maybe she's on the wrong ship." Maris did not need to hear the exact words to understand the shape of the conversation. It was human nature to create stories when faced with something uncertain. From her position, she could see the elegant lettering on the Aurora Sky's hull. She thought of the journey ahead, the deep void of space, the star systems they would pass, the new station at the far edge of known travel. She had a reason for making this trip, one she had shared with no one at the terminal. The reason was not only personal but also important, though no one here could guess it. The two security officers reached the counter and spoke to Lauren. Their voices were low, but Maris could see Lauren's posture stiffen. He gestured slightly in her direction. The officers glanced at her again, then continued speaking. The murmur of the passengers grew softer now, as if waiting for something to happen. Even those who had been focused on their own boarding passes seemed to sense that the air was shifting. Maris did not move. Her calm was steady, her eyes on the silver ship beyond the glass. The officers finished their quiet conversation with Lauren, then stepped away, disappearing behind a door marked, "Authorized personnel only." The line of passengers thinned as more people crossed into the ship. Soon the terminal would be nearly empty except for the last boarding group. Maris remained where she was, unhurried, her thoughts steady. She knew that journeys often began in unexpected ways, and sometimes the path to the right place required standing still until the right moment arrived. She adjusted her travel bag slightly on her shoulder and took a slow breath. The hum of the terminal, the whisper of conversations, and the soft light of Vega Prime all surrounded her like the opening chapter of a story that was not yet ready to reveal its ending. Far above the terminal floor, on deck 1 of the Aurora Skies, the captain's lounge stretched out like a small world of its own. Its wide windows framed the curve of Vega Prime and the endless black of space beyond. The quiet hum of the ship's systems was constant, a gentle reminder of the power resting inside the vessel's polished frame. Rian Ellen stood near the largest window, a cup of tea in his hand. He was a tall man in his early 40s, his posture straight, his uniform jacket resting on the back of a chair. He rarely wore the jacket unless he needed to be seen by the public. Today, he preferred the simple dark shirt beneath it. His mind was on the journey ahead, not only the voyage, but the importance of this first trip for the Aurora Skies. Ryan was not only the captain for this flight, he was also the owner of Ellen Interstellar Fleet, the company that had built this ship. His family name was painted on the hull, though most passengers never realized that the man guiding their ship was the very person who had made its existence possible. He liked it that way. A soft chime from the wall console signaled an incoming message. Ryan walked over and tapped the control panel. A young operations officer's face appeared on the screen. "Captain Ellen," the officer said, "I have the final passenger manifest for your review. I thought you would like to see it before departure." Ryan nodded and accepted the file. The manifest appeared as a list of names and seat assignments, each glowing faintly on the display. He scanned it slowly, his eyes moving down the list, making sure everything was in order. Halfway down the page, his hand froze. The name in front of him was Maris Ellen. His gaze lingered on the letters. It had been many months since he had last seen that name outside of a personal message. His mother. Ryan leaned back slightly, his mind shifting from the ship to memories. He could picture her as clearly as if she were standing in front of him. Small in stature, with eyes that never lost their brightness. She was the one who had encouraged him to dream beyond the planet where they were born, the one who told him that distance was never a barrier for those willing to take the first step. He remembered her telling him years ago, "A ship is not just metal and fuel. It is a promise." Those words had stayed with him through the long years of building his fleet. Ryan quickly tapped a command to bring up her ticket information. His eyes narrowed slightly as he read. She had purchased a first-class seat for this very voyage in one of the private suites. There was no note about her arrival, no message sent to him directly. She had planned this quietly. A small crease formed in his brow. If she was here, why had she not come aboard yet? According to the boarding records, her ticket had been scanned at the gate, but then marked as denied. That was unusual. He tapped his communicator. "Bridge, this is Captain Ellen. Can you confirm the boarding status for passenger Maris Ellen? Suite 1-12. There was a pause before the reply came. "Sir, according to the system, passenger Maris Ellen was not granted clearance to board. The record lists the ticket as invalid." "Invalid?" Ryan's voice was calm, but there was a new weight behind it. "Run a full check on that record and find out where she is right now." "Yes, Captain." Ryan turned toward the window again, though his thoughts were no longer on the stars. His mother had never been one to make mistakes with travel. If her ticket was marked invalid, there had to be another reason. He thought of the spaceport terminal, the crowded gates, the attendants who followed the rules too closely without seeing the person in front of them. He set the tea down and walked quickly to the lounge exit. His steps were measured but quick, the sound of his boots on the polished floor echoing in the quiet corridor. In the crew lift, he pressed the control for the docking level. The lift moved smoothly downward, the gentle vibration of the ship beneath his feet. He pictured the terminal in his mind, the lines of passengers, the glow of the boarding signs, the glass walls looking out to the stars. Somewhere down there, his mother was waiting. The lift doors opened to the docking level. Crew members stepped aside as he passed, nodding in respect. Some recognized him as the captain, though few knew his role beyond that. He kept walking until he reached the security checkpoint near the boarding bridge. Two security officers were waiting there, speaking quietly to each other. When they saw him, they straightened immediately. "Captain Ellen," one said. "We were just informed about a passenger you may be looking for." "Yes," Ryan replied. "Where is she?" "In the terminal near Gate 6, the officer said. "She's been standing aside since boarding began. The gate attendant marked her ticket as invalid." Ryan's jaw tightened slightly. "Bring her to me. Now, and make sure she's treated with full courtesy." The officers nodded and moved quickly toward the gate. Ryan stayed where he was for a moment, watching them go. He could already picture the scene, his mother standing quietly, her travel bag in hand, while the noise of the terminal moved around her. He knew she would not be upset. She would simply be waiting, as she always had when she knew the truth would reveal itself. He took a slow breath and straightened his posture. If anyone had failed to recognize who she was, it would be corrected before the ship left dock. On the other side of the security checkpoint, the bright expanse of the terminal came into view through the glass panels. Passengers were still boarding, but the line was smaller now. In the distance, Ryan caught sight of a familiar figure standing calmly near the edge of the waiting area. Even from here, he recognized her. His steps became more certain as he crossed toward the boarding bridge, ready to meet her halfway. Maris was still standing near the side of Gate 6. The crowd had thinned now, leaving more space between the remaining passengers. The soft voice of the station announcer continued calling boarding groups, but the sound felt distant. She could see the boarding bridge clearly now, stretching like a silver walkway into the waiting ship. Her thoughts were calm. She had not moved because she believed there was no need to push forward. If she was meant to be on this journey, the right moment would arrive. She had learned long ago that sometimes the key to moving forward was simply to stay still. A faint change in the air made her lift her head. The two security officers she had noticed earlier were now walking directly toward her. Their uniforms were neat, their steps quick but steady. They did not look alarmed. Instead, their expressions were serious, as if they had been given clear instructions. When they reached her, one of them, a tall man with light brown hair, spoke politely. "Ma'am, are you Maris Ellen?" "Yes," she replied with a slight smile. "We would like to escort you to the boarding bridge," he said. His voice carried a note of respect. "The captain has requested your presence aboard immediately." The words were simple, but they caused a ripple among the passengers nearby. A woman sitting with her travel bag half open looked up sharply. The young couple who had whispered earlier leaned slightly toward each other, their eyes following the scene. Even Lauren, the gate attendant, glanced up from his scanner, his usual brisk manner faltering for a moment. Maris looked at the officers calmly. "The captain?" "Yes, ma'am," the second officer confirmed. "He is waiting for you at the docking level." She gave a small nod. "Very well." The officers stepped slightly to either side of her, not as though they were guarding her, but as if guiding her along an important path. Their pace was steady, unhurried, but the shift in the terminal's attention was clear. People were watching now. As they approached the gate counter, Lauren straightened, his voice sounding careful when he spoke. "Is there a problem?" The first officer shook his head. "No problem. This passenger is to be escorted directly to the captain's care." Lauren's eyes moved quickly to Maris, then back to the officer. He said nothing else, but his posture changed. It was the kind of change that came when someone realized they might have overlooked something important. Maris walked past the counter with her bag still in her hand. The sound of her steps on the polished floor was soft, but in the quiet space between announcements it seemed louder. She could feel the eyes of other passengers following her. Once they reached the start of the boarding bridge, the glass walls on either side opened the view into space. The aurora skies filled the frame, silver and strong, its engines glowing, faintly as they prepared for departure. The bridge itself was smooth and bright, the floor gently lit to guide passengers toward the entrance. Halfway across, the officers slowed slightly. Ahead of them, a tall figure was waiting at the far end of the bridge. He stood with his hands loosely clasped behind his back, his dark shirt neat and his gaze steady. Maris recognized him instantly. Ryan. Her son looked much as she remembered. Focused, composed, carrying the weight of responsibility with quiet strength. She could see the hint of relief in his eyes even before he began to move toward her. The officers stepped aside as Ryan closed the distance between them. He stopped only a step away from her and gave a warm smile. "Mother." "Ryan," she said softly, her voice calm but carrying a note of affection. Without hesitation, he reached out and placed his hands lightly on her shoulders. It was not a grand gesture, but it was full of meaning. In that moment, The quiet hum of the bridge seemed to fade for the onlookers. They understood now that this was not an ordinary passenger. Behind them, Loren had stepped closer to the bridge entrance, his expression unreadable. The passengers, who could see the scene through the terminal windows, leaned forward, their curiosity sharpening. Ryan kept his voice low, meant only for her. "You could have told me you were coming?" She smiled faintly. Surprises have their place. For a moment, they simply stood there, the light from the ship reflecting softly off the glass walls. Then Ryan turned to the officers. "Thank you. I will take her from here." The officers gave a short nod and stepped back. Ryan gestured toward the entrance of the ship. "Shall we?" Maris nodded and walked beside him. As they moved forward, the polished metal of the Aurora skies gleamed brighter, and the air grew cooler with the ship's controlled atmosphere. Inside the entrance, a pair of crew members stood ready to greet boarding passengers. When they saw Ryan, they straightened. Immediately, their eyes flicked from him to Maris, and though they said nothing, their expressions showed that they understood she was someone of great importance. Ryan guided her toward the lift that would take them to the upper decks. The soft hum of the lift doors closing surrounded them. As they began to ascend, Maris glanced at her son. "I see you still carry yourself like the boy who used to stand guard at the garden gate." He smiled slightly. "And I see you still have a way of walking into the middle of things without telling anyone." Her eyes softened. "It seems to work." The lift reached deck 1, and the doors opened to reveal the quiet elegance of the captain's lounge. The wide windows displayed the stars, and the polished surfaces reflected the soft light from overhead. Ryan stepped aside to let her enter first. "This will be more comfortable than waiting in the terminal," he said. Maris looked out at the stars for a long moment before turning back to him. "Comfort is not the measure of a journey, Ryan. But I will admit this view is worth the trip." Somewhere below them, final boarding was being announced. Soon the Aurora skies would leave the docking station and begin its journey. For now, in the quiet space of the lounge, mother and son stood together, the hum of the great ship around them. The final boarding call for the Aurora skies echoed gently through the terminal speakers. Passengers hurried across the sky bridge, their luggage drones following behind in quiet formation. The wide glass walls of the bridge glowed with the reflected light of the ship's silver hull. Ryan Ellen stood at the far end of the bridge, just inside the docking hatch. His presence there was unusual. Captains rarely greeted passengers personally. The crew members stationed nearby kept glancing at him, wondering why he had chosen to remain instead of returning to the bridge to prepare for departure. He was waiting for the right moment. The 2 security officers who had escorted Maris earlier returned through the bridge, leading her toward him. She walked with the same calm steps she had kept since the start of this journey, her worn leather bag still in her hand. There was no rush in her pace, no sign of unease. She looked like someone who already knew how this day would end. As they drew closer, Ryan stepped forward. The officers moved aside, allowing him to greet her without obstruction. "Mother," he said, his voice warm but clear. Passengers behind them slowed their steps when they heard the word. A few turned their heads, their curiosity catching on the simple exchange. "Ryan," Maris replied, a small smile forming. Her tone was steady, but her eyes carried a quiet pride. Without hesitation, Ryan embraced her. It was not a long embrace, but it was enough to make the surrounding crew members pause. Few had ever seen their captain show such open familiarity, and fewer still had guessed that this modestly dressed woman was related to him at all. The moment lingered for only a few seconds before Ryan stepped back, keeping one hand lightly on her shoulder. His attention shifted toward the gate entrance, where the remaining passengers and staff could clearly see them through the bridge's glass walls. Lauren, the gate attendant, was among them. His earlier confidence seemed to have faded, replaced by an uncertain stillness. The other passengers looked on with interest, some leaning slightly toward the glass as if to catch every detail. Ryan's voice carried just enough to be heard clearly, on both sides of the glass. "I believe there was a mistake at the gate," he said. "This passenger belongs on this ship, more than anyone here." His words were calm, not sharp, yet they carried a weight that settled over the gathered crowd. One of the nearby crew members shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the ground. The security officers remained still, their expressions neutral but alert. Maris, however, seemed entirely at ease. She stood beside her son without speaking, her eyes steady, as though she was letting the silence do part of the work. Passengers in the terminal exchanged glances. A few whispered quietly, but the sound of their voices was softened by the glass. Those whispers were not the same as before. They were no longer guessing who she was. They were beginning to understand. Ryan released his hold on her shoulder, but stayed close. "Please come aboard," he said, his tone shifting to something softer, meant for her alone. She nodded, and together they walked through the last stretch of the bridge toward the open hatch. Crew members stepped aside to let them pass, their eyes following until they disappeared into the interior of the Aurora skies. The hatch remained open for a few more minutes to allow the final passengers to board. Loren processed each one with mechanical efficiency, but his posture was different now. The glance he cast toward the bridge from time to time showed a quiet thoughtfulness. Inside the ship, Ryan led Maris through the entrance corridor. The air was cooler here, the quiet hum of the engines steady beneath the floor. Large digital panels displayed the ship's route, with bright lines tracing the path through several star systems before reaching the far station. As they walked, a few passengers recognized Ryan and stepped aside politely. Their eyes moved from him to Maris, connecting the scene they had just witnessed with the man's identity. Small smiles or nods passed between them, though no one spoke aloud. When they reached the central lounge area, Ryan paused. The large windows here gave a clear view of the terminal beyond. Through the glass, they could still see people moving around inside, some finding their seats in the waiting area, others heading toward different gates. Maris stepped closer to the window. "From here," she said quietly, "the terminal looks like a smaller world, and the ship feels like the start of a much larger one." Ryan smiled slightly. "It always feels that way before departure." He turned to a nearby crew member. "Make sure Suite 112 is ready." The crew member nodded quickly and left. For a moment, they stood together in silence, looking out at the view. The terminal lights reflected in the glass, mixing with the faint glow of the ship's exterior panels. It was a view few people noticed, in detail, distracted as they often were by schedules and luggage. Ryan finally spoke again, his tone measured. "There is something I want you to understand about what happened today. Not everyone knows the whole picture when they see a person for the first time. Sometimes they think they know enough after one glance. They do not always mean harm, but they can still be wrong." Maris listened without interrupting. "I try to teach my crew," Ryan continued, "that a passenger's value is not measured by how they look or what they carry. It is measured by the fact that they entrusted us with their journey." Her smile returned, quiet but certain. "And sometimes," she said, "the lesson is learned best when the mistake is seen in the open." Ryan's gaze met hers, and for a moment they shared the understanding that needed no further words. The boarding hatch closed with a muted hiss. The soft tone of the ship's departure sequence sounded over the internal speakers. Soon, the Aurora skies would pull away from Vega Prime, leaving the terminal behind. In that moment, for those who had seen what happened, the image of the captain meeting the woman at the bridge would remain, a reminder that appearances could mislead, and respect should always come first. The Aurora skies glided free of the docking arms, its silver hull reflecting the soft glow of Vega Prime's twin moons. Inside the ship, the soft chime of departure rang through the halls. Passengers settled into their seats, luggage drones, stored belongings, and crew members moved with practiced efficiency. The deep hum of the engines grew stronger as the ship prepared for the first jump into faster-than-light travel. In the captain's lounge, Ryan Ellen stood by the large viewing window looking at the stars beginning to shift position. Maris was seated nearby, her leather bag resting at her side. She looked out at the same stars, her eyes steady. Neither of them spoke for a moment. A call came through Ryan's communicator. "Captain, the passengers are all aboard and secured. Would you like to address them before we initiate the jump?" "Yes," Ryan replied. He straightened, put on his uniform jacket, and walked toward the nearest lift. The doors closed around him with a quiet hum as the lift descended to the main passenger deck. When the doors opened, he stepped out into the central hall, a wide open space lined with glass panels showing the deep black of space outside. The passengers who were walking through the hall slowed when they saw him. Some recognized him as the captain. Others only knew him as the man they had seen greeting the elderly woman on the boarding bridge. Murmurs rippled through the air, but they quieted quickly when he moved toward the central speaking platform. Soft tone from the ship's intercom announced, "Captain Ellen will now address all passengers." The hall grew silent. Passengers remained in place, and even those in private lounges and suites tuned in through the small display screens in their rooms. Ryan's voice was steady, carrying just enough weight to fill the space without force. "Good evening, passengers of the Aurora skies. We are now clear of Vega Prime and preparing for our first jump. Before we begin our journey, I wish to say a few words." His gaze moved slowly across the faces before him. This ship was built to carry people across great distances in comfort and safety. But a ship is not just metal and engines. It is also the people who travel together inside it. Every passenger who steps aboard is part of its story. He paused for a moment, letting the words settle. "This evening," he continued, "something happened at our boarding gate. A passenger was told they could not board even though they had the correct ticket. The reason was simple. Someone thought they already knew enough about that person after only one glance. They thought the passenger did not belong here." The crowd remained still, some shifting slightly but keeping their eyes on him. Ryan's tone remained calm, but there was a firmness beneath it. "I tell my crew that respect is the boarding pass everyone should carry. It is not printed on paper and it does not expire. It is the one thing that allows every journey to begin in the right way. Without it, even the most beautiful ship will lose its purpose." A few passengers nodded quietly. Others exchanged small glances, recalling the scene at the gate. Ryan went on. "I am not telling you this to point fingers. We all make mistakes. But we must also remember that those mistakes can become lessons if we are willing to see them. You may think you know a person after the first moment you meet them, but sometimes that person's story is far greater than you imagine." His voice softened slightly. "The passenger I spoke of today was my mother. She is the reason I stand here now. The values she taught me are the same ones I have tried to shape into this company. She believed that the true worth of a journey is not measured in luxury or speed, but in the way we treat the people who share it with us." There was a quiet stillness in the room. The passengers who had witnessed the meeting on the bridge now understood the full meaning of what they had seen. Ryan gave a small nod. "So as we begin our voyage tonight, I ask you to carry that respect with you, for my crew, for your fellow passengers, and for the journey itself. If we can do that, we will not only reach our destination, but we will arrive with something worth keeping." He stepped back from the speaking platform, and the intercom connection ended. Passengers slowly began moving again, but the mood in the hall had shifted. The conversation was quieter now, thoughtful rather than hurried. Ryan made his way back, toward the lift. A few passengers offered him small nods as he passed, and he returned them with the same calm expression. When he reached the captain's lounge again, Maris was still seated by the viewing window. She looked up at him as he entered. "You spoke well," she said. "It was the truth," he replied. She gave a faint smile. Truth travels faster than any ship. Outside the window, the stars began to stretch into long lines of light as the ship's engines engaged the jump sequence. The aurora skies surged forward into the vastness, carrying with it not only hundreds of passengers, but also the quiet memory of a lesson shared at the very start of its first journey. The aurora skies sailed through the shimmering tunnel of faster-than-light travel, its hull glowing faintly as streams of light curved across the viewports. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was calm. The hum of the engines was steady, a sound, like a distant heartbeat that reassured passengers of the ship's strength. Maris sat in her seat near the wide viewing window of the captain's lounge. The stars outside were no longer single points of light, but long silver trails that moved in silent harmony. Her hands rested lightly on her lap, her posture relaxed but attentive, as if she did not want to miss a single moment of the journey. Rian entered quietly, carrying 2 steaming cups from the ship's small refreshment station. He placed one in front of her before sitting down beside her. "Herbal tea," he said. "The same blend you used to make at home." Maris lifted the cup, inhaling the familiar scent. "You remembered." "I remember everything," Ryan replied. For a while they drank in silence. The lounge was quiet, except for the faint sound of footsteps from crew members walking down the hall beyond the sliding doors. Passengers in the other sections of the ship had begun to settle into their own routines, some enjoying the entertainment areas, others resting in their cabins, and a few simply staring out into the vast, beautiful unknown. Maris set her cup down. "You have built something remarkable," she said. "But it is not just the ship. It is the way you lead, today. You reminded people of something they should always carry." Ryan smiled faintly. "I hope so. Words only matter if they change something." "They will," she answered with quiet certainty. A soft tone sounded from the intercom. "Attention, passengers," a calm voice announced. "We will be passing near the Aurora Nebula in 15 minutes. Viewing is available from all observation decks." Maris glanced at Ryan. "The Aurora Nebula. I have heard of it but never seen it." "Then we will see it now," he said, standing and offering his hand. They left the lounge and walked through the ship's main corridor. As they passed, crew members greeted Maris with respectful nods. The passengers who had witnessed the earlier scene at the gate now looked at her with new eyes, some even offering polite smiles. Maris returned each greeting with warmth, her expression open and calm. They reached the observation deck, a wide, curved space filled with clear panels from floor to ceiling. Already a soft glow was beginning to appear ahead of the ship, a faint shimmer in the blackness of space. Slowly, the shimmer grew brighter, spreading like delicate silk across the darkness. When the aurora skies drew closer, the nebula unfolded into view, swirling clouds of gold, blue, and pale green light, twisting, gently as if alive. The sight drew quiet gasps from the passengers gathered there. No one spoke loudly. The beauty of the moment seemed to still every voice. Maris stood at the front, her hand resting lightly on the railing. "It is like the sky is breathing," she said softly. "It is why this ship is named what it is," Ryan told her. "My hope was that every journey on the aurora skies would give people a moment like this, something that makes them stop and remember where they are and how rare it is to see such beauty." As the nebula drifted past, Ryan noticed the gate attendant from earlier standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. His posture was less rigid now, and his eyes were fixed on the nebula. After a moment, he glanced toward Maris, hesitated, then slowly approached. "Ma'am," he said in a low voice, "I want to apologize for what happened earlier. I should have treated you with respect from the start. I was wrong." Maris looked at him kindly. Thank you for saying so. We all have moments we can learn from. What matters is what we do after. The attendant nodded, clearly relieved, and stepped back to rejoin the group. When the nebula finally faded into the distance, the passengers began to drift away from the deck, speaking quietly about what they had seen. The glow of the nebula still reflected faintly on the windows, a reminder of the beauty they had just passed. Maris and Ryan returned to the lounge. She sat once again near the window, watching the stars return to their long silver streaks. No, she said after a while. When you were a boy, you used to look at the night sky and tell me you would one day take me to see the places between the stars. I always believed you. Ryan smiled. And now, here we are. She gave a small nod. Here we are. The rest of the evening passed quietly. Passengers moved through the ship with the calm confidence that comes from knowing they are in capable hands. In the dining hall, small groups shared meals and soft laughter. In the observation deck, a few travelers stayed late, watching the endless stream of light outside. Later, as the ship settled into its cruise speed, Ryan walked the main deck one last time. He checked in with his officers, reviewed the status reports, and made sure every system was running smoothly. The ship was in perfect condition, ready to carry its passengers safely to their destination. When he finally returned to the lounge, Maris had fallen asleep in her chair, the empty teacup beside her. He adjusted the small blanket around her shoulders and sat down nearby, looking out at the endless silver lines of light. The aurora skies sailed on through the deep silence of space, carrying hundreds of stories, some beginning, some ending, and some, like Maris's, continuing in ways no one could have predicted. The journey forward was long, but it was filled with promise, and somewhere ahead, beyond the glowing paths of the stars, waited the next chapter in a voyage that had already changed more than just its destination.